Good morning and welcome, Amanda, to this session. It's good to see you here. We're going to be asking a few questions to see how you understand this role, and then we'll be issuing a report and judging your position and suitability. Okay?
Thank you.
So, why do you want to be Her Majesty's Chief Inspector?
Why? It's a bit of a mountain answer, isn't it? Because it's there. It's something that's incredibly important in the system that cannot be approached simplistically. It's not a sort of routine thing that you simply have to point in a certain direction and off it goes. It's something that needs both understanding of education, understanding of large and complex systems and how they evolve and need to be steered over time, understanding of sort of government and the pressures in government, understandings of a big and complex profession. It sort of brings it all together in a very exciting way. It's a sort of challenge that I couldn't resist.
Right, okay. So, have you done any mountaineering?
Walking, I would say, rather than mountaineering.
Right, okay. In a couple of sentences, what are the qualities you will bring to the role?
Things I'll bring. First of all, a really strong interest in evidence grounding, making sure that the inspection system genuinely looks at what's there, doesn't sort of overstretch itself, overreach itself, does exactly what it says on the tin it's meant to do. Secondly, really building system feedback, making sure that Ofsted continues to listen to, be responsive to, make sure that its processes develop in a way that is in the interests of the system as a whole. It's a difficult balance it has to strike because every report has to be completely honest and objective, for good or ill, and yet Ofsted also has to add up to a force for system improvement. There's no point having it unless the cumulative total effect is positive. So that's the sort of strategic balance it always has to strike.
Okay. Now, Ofsted is a big organisation, larger than Ofqual. The position of Chief Inspector is one which attracts attention, a significant profile. So that's the first issue. And the second one is actually, it's a big organisation to run. So first of all, do you think that you would be happy in such a high-profile role? And what would you be able to bring to the table to support that sort of overall role?
Would I be happy? Yes. I have been tested to some extent, to a considerable extent actually, in the Ofqual role over the last 5 years, where being chairman is less high profile than being chief executive, but nevertheless it's an organisation that has been under considerable pressure, where there's been ups and downs and criticism. That has given me a lot of exposure to what it's like in the kind of organisation where the upside is system respect and the downside is widespread dislike. So working through that, coping with that, I think I have the sort of resilience and qualities to do that. I think some of the personality tests that I was put through as part of the application process were designed to see if I had that kind of resilience. Sorry, that was the first part of your question. The second part was around the skills to do it.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the principles of management are pretty similar in all organisations. You have to make sure you have a workable model, a working team, understand who you can rely on for what, make sure that you build systems that improve, not systems that destroy. Ofsted has a very strategic role in the system. I have a very strong understanding of sort of corporate strategy, sort of thinking about sort of organisational development in a big system. I know a lot from Ofqual about how the decisions that are taken by an organisation like this can have repercussions through the system, so the way you need to collect feedback, use evidence and so on, to make sure that what you're doing isn't in a bubble, that it's something that is genuinely likely to help the systems, in all the systems, not just schools, children's services, everywhere else that Ofsted works.
What experience can you point to that you have had which would help you run such a large organisation?
The parts of my career, so before I came into education 15 years ago, I was strategy director at AT&T Capital, which at that point I think was the third largest finance company, commercial finance company in the US. It had, I can't quite remember the numbers, but many billions, very big distributed organisation with many offices. To some extent from ARC Schools, building a sort of multi-site organisation, different from Ofsted, but nevertheless a school is a separate unit with a great deal of sort of self-contained activity. So, and Ofsted has 8 regional offices and a great network of inspectors who are sort of part-time. So thinking about the levers, the structures, making sure that you really understand the strategic drivers, tracking the right things and seeing where any gaps are opening up. Ofsted.
Okay. Catherine, would you like to pursue the line of personal independence?
Yeah, we all know Sir Michael Wilshaw could be very robust in challenging government policy. To what extent do you believe that is part of your role as Ofsted Chief Inspector?
It's very much part of the role. Ofsted has a very clear sort of mandate to be independent, as does Ofqual, and I think Ofqual is seen to have used independence judiciously, but very clearly when necessary. 2 examples I can sort of draw on today that stand out. One was we gave clear advice to the then Education Secretary about the English Baccalaureate certificates at the time, that the proposal was to do as a contract model for a single provider at the same time as doing qualification reform. We wrote to the Minister advising him that doing both of those simultaneously would impose too great a risk on the system. He listened to that advice and decided to pursue qualification reform, but not industry reform at that point. Another one would be the decision that we took to delay most of the new GCSEs by a year. There was a ministerial request to have all the new GCSEs for first teaching in 2015. We decided that wasn't deliverable, that only English and Maths should be done to that timetable and others should be deferred. More generally, I've thought a lot over the last few years about what an independent inspector or regulator needs to think about and to get right in order for independence to really work in practice. And I think there are several things. One is I think there needs to be clear agreement about the inspector's remit and its interpretation. The statutory words are always there, but there does need to be a shared understanding of what it is at any given time. An inspector has to work on evidence. It's not a job where you simply throw opinions around. It's a job where you really look at your evidence base, analyse it, think about what needs to be said, how that is aggregates and what needs to be said at any given time. So you have a clear message, but it is very, very well grounded in your own work. And of course, good communications matter. Nobody likes nasty surprises. The inspectorate shouldn't be throwing surprises at anybody in the system. It should be a steady accumulation of work that sort of builds ineluctably to clear conclusions. And if you get that right, then you have the kind of risk.
Michelle, would you like to pursue this line of questioning, number 3?
Just following on really from Catherine's comments before, so ARC is widely viewed as one of the best academy chains in the country, and it's very highly respected. Could it be that working there has not given you a complete cross-section of the education system and has given you a sort of pool, a very small pool of specific knowledge?
You always have to be open to new knowledge wherever it comes from. I think people generally think I'm particularly interested in soaking up new stuff. ARC has a whole range of schools, from sort of very high performers to schools in the most difficult circumstances that have just arrived in the network. It does have a skew towards disadvantage. It's got far more schools that serve disadvantaged children, so I fully acknowledge that I've had less exposure to schools with very, very advantaged intakes, and I need to make sure I get a sort of full perspective. That's partly why in my preliminary discussions with the senior team, the advantage of having several months of lead-in time is I can do a very thorough sort of preparation thinking about children's services, thinking about early years, thinking about doing as much sort of inspection training, shadowing, preparation as I can to make sure that I have real insight into the issues in all parts of the system. I very much don't want to be thinking because I've had exposure to this, I sort of know it all. One of the benefits of doing something like Ofqual for the last few years is you become very aware of how much lies below the surface. That 9/10 is largely invisible from public discussion, and 1/10 is the bit you see at the top. So I'm very conscious that there will be an iceberg here as everywhere else, and that my first few months have to be about really understanding the whole, making sure that I've got the right perspective and use advice from inside and outside to get that.
So you're recognising that there will be gaps and you're going to work on them straight away, but then do you accept that the current Chief Inspector and the previous Chair were also drawn from art schools? Do you think that it's healthy to keep doing that? Is there a potential problem in the long term?
Firstly, it's not my decision, and clearly I haven't been part of those decisions. Secondly, I think any good person sort of rapidly, immediately puts themselves entirely in the role they're in. I had to do that with ARC schools, for example, in 2012 with the GCSE English. The decision the Ofqual took to sustain its position on those GCSEs, by that time I knew that a number of ARC schools were adversely affected, but so be it. I could not let the ARC particular interest or how it was affected colour my decision as a regulator. Our decision, I should say, sorry.
Okay, thank you. William, the classroom.
Indeed, we talk about experience, whether it's direct or indirect, and recently Ofsted have placed a greater emphasis on including serving practitioners in their inspection teams. And to dwell perhaps on the point, but will it therefore be odd to have a chief inspector who hasn't had that frontline experience in the classroom, or indeed, as we've not discussed yet, where it's social care experience, given the remit of Ofsted?
I don't think so at all. First, as you just pointed out, Ofsted is not just all about the schools.
Of questioning is underpinned by the fact that we have had a significant number of teachers writing to us on this very issue of your lack of experience in the classroom. So, are you minded to give some consideration to how you might tackle that problem in the run-up to your actual taking up the post?
Yes, I think you're defining it as a problem, something which I don't see as a problem. I see it as simply part of making sure that the way the Ofsted is structured and managed over the next few years makes sure that the right skills are in the right places. Ofsted, I don't think that the chief inspector is, at the end of the day, the chief executive of the organisation. They're not a person out separately from the rest of Ofsted. Ofsted is a sort of corporate entity which collectively does these things that are needed. I don't want to define myself as Ofsted incarnate, if you like.
The chief inspector is not necessarily kind of a manager of skills. He or she is a person who really has to give leadership to the organisation. You have to have the sense of connection, not just to your own team, yes, but also to the people you are interfacing with, which is obviously the schools.
And I think that sense of connection is very much reflected in so much positive reaction from so many heads that I've read in sort of blogs, newspaper articles, Twitter, is precisely because I have put a lot of effort into connecting over the years. I think that ASCL response exactly reflects that I've always put an enormous amount of weight on that.
Ian, would you like to pursue the issue of children's services?
Yeah, I could be cynical, Amanda, and say that head teachers would be wanting to welcome a new chief inspector because it's in their vested interest to do so. But anyway, not to worry. The quality or otherwise of local services for children and family support can often take on the importance of life or death, or in ways that have the most profound impacts on the life chances for children. So what experience do you have of children's services and children's social care?
As my CV makes clear, I have no direct experience whatever. The only experience I can point to on this is as 7 years as a governor in a school in a fairly tough part of London where there were many children needing social care of various kinds, and where I was involved firsthand on occasion as a governor and at governing body level about the flow of sort of casework and the kind of load the school was it from the perspective of the teacher. And the conversations I have with teachers, that is what is typically preoccupying them at the moment, is that change.
Okay, look, the reason I'm asking this is because I don't think you need access to Ofsted's detailed data to know that standards in British schools on the whole are not good enough, and that there's a real problem when we're behind on basic skills, behind not just South Korea or Finland, but Poland, Estonia, Slovakia, who've improved much more quickly than us over the last few years. Now, if you're not coming to this and saying, standards aren't good enough, I've got a mission to drive them up, this is how I'm going to do it, I'm going to be evangelical about school improvement and enabling young people in Britain to fulfil their potential. I mean, I'm sort of worried about that, if I'm honest.
Okay. There are lots and lots of places where standards are not good enough, but if you simply start out with a sort of blanket, then you antagonise and alienate people on day one. What I have to be in this role is properly discriminating and say, here are the places where things aren't good enough, here are the places where they are. If you simply produce entirely negative messages, then you don't actually help improvement.
But is it not the Chief Inspector's role to be a sort of crusader for high aspirations and standards? And if the Chief Inspector is not saying, I think British kids are as good as any in the world and they've got to have the best education possible. I mean, if that's not your sort of driving mission,
raising standards is absolutely the driving mission and my driving mission, and that's why I've spent 15 years in education. Words like crusader and warrior, I think, are ones that we need to be careful about, because when you start crusading, you can often slightly lose track of the objectivity, honesty, integrity that are needed to do this well. To say, this bit is 60% good, 40% bad, this bit is 70-30. Things are not necessarily black and white, and you have to motivate people in the system to work on the right things in the right places. So, you use the word crusader. I see it more about being dogged and relentless in places where that's needed. And that sort of relentlessness, persistence, determination are the qualities that I would want to show as inspector, rather than shouting at people.
I think Ian is really probing you on the question of, do you want to simply be a good inspector, or do you want to make a difference in our school system?
I want to make a difference. I want what Ofsted does to make a real constructive difference.
So what
and
difference would that be?
It would be real change in educational outcomes and in children's services outcomes. I have to keep reminding myself that there are all these pieces across the board over my term of office, and partly by reference to sort of domestic measurement and partly by reference to sort of international comparisons. I would so much want to see real improvement. It's been immensely frustrating for me over the years seeing international comparisons come back showing a sort of
Marion,
flattish
you've got a
picture.
question, I think.
Well, I haven't a question, just a comment. I'm really careful here because there is no such thing as a British education system. And
Thank
I
you.
keep playing into this. Scotland,
Yeah.
Wales, other parts of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, have different educational systems. Take fully on board, though,
Yeah.
that I think if you were to be appointed into this role, that you should have a passion for improvement and that you should want to see education and children's achievement improve vastly in England, where your
Indeed.
remit runs. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that was what took me into education 15 years ago, and is precisely that, and is why I'm still at it.
Yeah. Before we move on, Ian, have you finished your line? Because you've got more to ask about assessing standards in a minute. But before you do, you said earlier that you wanted to be or would be anchored to the evidence that Ofsted had. Aren't there two problems with that? First of all, you're going to be dealing with other structures, like, for example, the National Schools Commissioner. He has a different set.
Progress rather than attainment measures has been crucial over the last few years. I think it's done a lot to wake some schools up to the idea that their results maybe weren't as good as they thought they were.
Are you worried that schools could do well on Progress 8 but still not be dealing with issues like tackling extremism or safeguarding? And how would you identify that?
Well, that's why inspectors on the ground are really important. I just talked about the three things that you want to see that the data.
Would they? Because, well, they wouldn't be inspected.
Well, that's why.
That's the point I'm making. That's the sort of question
Well,
I want to ask.
and that's why sort of feedback from other sources that tells you whether there are concerns is incredibly important. But exemption from inspection is a very powerful lever and one that I really want to look at and understand. Because it's you're right. It changes in Progress 8 are unlikely to pick up and show deterioration in some areas that is pretty much unrelated to educational achievement.
Thanks. Thank you.
Marion?
Thank you. In an increasingly academic, I can't say it, we don't have it in Scotland, academised system, will the role of the National Schools Commissioner become more significant than if you're appointed as Inspector, your role?
Shame. I think they're both very important jobs, and I think working out over the next few months, couple of years, how that interface should work is really important. I don't yet have the position to be able to have those conversations, but clearly, we've got to have an understanding, a consistent understanding of our respective roles that adds up to something that works for schools. At the end of the day, and make sure that they get the right information, the right support from the right places.
Now, you've already said and alluded to the fact that you don't have enough background information, etc. But how do you propose to manage this relationship with the National Schools Commissioner? Do you have some ideas going forward about because there will have to be some sort of almost personal relationship, working relationship.
Absolutely.
So,
and good relationships between national organisations typically have to run at several levels, so it wouldn't be all about...
Can I ask you about further education? Nearly 2/3 of the general further education colleges Ofsted inspected last year were rated as requires improvement or inadequate. Why do you think the sector's doing so badly?
I've had some very interesting conversations about this already with the team. And again, one step back, I've spent quite a lot of time. It's not very visible from the CV, but a lot of Ofqual's work is in vocational qualifications and things that primarily affect FE. So I established a vocational advisory group to the board so that we get specific advice on that side. Encourage the establishment of a vocational qualification directorate. I've been involved in quite closely in our work on apprenticeships, functional skills, the early stages of looking at the Sainsbury recommendations. This is an area of very strong interest of mine. Again, the changes throughout the system have obviously had a very, very specific impact in FE. GCSE resits are clearly a sort of very live area of concern where there's a great deal of teaching and capacity required in FE that hasn't been required in the past, so that's reshaping their agendas. And a lot of FE colleges are very big, very complex organisations doing a lot of different things. The more things you pull together into a picture, the harder it is for everything to be good simultaneously. And that may be part of the reason. I don't know yet, but it's something, again, as I said before, I want to make sure that what I say is properly discriminating and that looks at the components and the causes. I don't want to express a blanket concern. I want to express an informed view that really highlights the places where things are needed.
Ofsted produced a particularly critical report last year about the quality of apprenticeships. Yeah. What do you think Ofsted might do about that? What levers has Ofsted got in apprenticeships?
Well, Ofsted's lever effectively has a single lever around the inspection of provisions, so focusing its inspection in the right places and making sure that the right information surfaces from those at institutional level and in aggregate is the thing it can do. That is the part it plays. So I want to make sure that everything that is properly surfaced is in the clearest, most constructive way possible.
Are you worried about the quality of apprenticeships from what you've seen?
It's such a big and diverse system. I think almost nobody really understands its full ramifications and complexities. The schools world is simple by comparison with the world of vocational education. So finding those ways of making it comprehensible so that people get their heads around the right things, so that focus in the system is on the right things is I think more of a challenge.
One of the complexities is likely to be the number of training providers. With the apprenticeship levy. May well be large numbers of employers will become training providers. How will you ensure that Ofsted's got the capacity to deal with such a large number of inspections that might lead to?
Well, it's something I'd want to have very early discussions with the senior team about the planning, the thinking there to make sure that the provision can be put in place. And if it couldn't be, then well, first it has been, but if it was going to require any additional resource, think about where that would have to come from to make it happen. It's the kind of planning that I'm sure Ofsted is doing all the time, especially in a time of sort of great change in the system.
Can I just on this, Chair, can I ask a couple of supplementaries?
Yes.
Do you think the Ofsted board should have more people with a sort of experience of further education?
As Chief Inspector, clearly the appointment of the board would not be my responsibility, but to have voices reflecting the different parts of the remit is certainly incredibly helpful. At Ofqual, I've done my best to encourage people from FE in particular.
What about on the inspection side then, and the senior staff at Ofsted? Do you think there should be more experience of the FE sector at that?
The Ofsted COO is very much an FE background. I think he was the national director for FE before he stepped into that role.
Do you share Sir Michael's concerns about the quality of FE in general? I mean, he was pretty critical, I think it's fair to say, about the FE sector.
I haven't yet seen the evidence that underpins that very broad opinion he expressed.
From what you know of FE generally, I mean, do you sort of share his views, or do you think that was overstated? I mean, it was quite controversial at the time, I think.
It was controversial. Because I do not have access to inspection evidence, I cannot say that he's wrong, but I can say that what I have seen from where I sit and the conversations I have in the system suggests a rather more complex, mixed picture
Most people don't actually have access to data about very much, but they can still form opinions. And the opinion about some aspects of further education, as mentioned by Ian in connection with Sir Michael's comments, is that it could improve. So do you think that there is something that Ofsted could do to help that improvement process along?
I don't yet know, is the short answer. Whereas my involvement with schools means that I have first-hand experience of seeing how the process of inspection affects schools and how schools react. I don't yet have first-hand experience of seeing how colleges react to inspection. That would be quite important for me to understand, I think, before expressing an informed opinion. I mean, you're right, and there is a difference between informed and uninformed opinion. On the school side, I can express at least an informed opinion, though I don't have the evidence base. On colleges and the other areas that Ofsted inspects, I'm not yet at the point of being sure that I have an informed opinion.
Disraeli was famous for pointing out that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. What he's really getting at was that you can think about statistics and data, but you've got to be able to make judgment about things. If I walk into a shop and decide what food I'm going to buy, I'm not going to start thinking about the data and the flow of the food coming in and out of other people's baskets. I'm going to make choices that I want to feed my children, etc., etc. So the data stuff is important, there's no doubt about that, but it's judgment as well which matters.
Yes. Absolutely.
So that's the important
Informed
thing
judgment,
that
yes.
the Chief Inspector must do. Can I just ask one technical question, though, about inspections, and it's this. You can get a primary school with 50 pupils or a FE college with several thousand, and yet the inspection system appears to be much the same for both. Do you think that is right? And if not, what would you want to do?
Is it right? Well, first of all, everybody who uses inspection reports, relies on inspection, wants it to give an assurance that their child, or them if they're is going to be safe and well educated in that system. It's got to satisfy that requirement, even in the case of, quite small provision. So you cannot simply say, well, because it's small, we won't bother.
Well, I'm really talking about the bigger picture.
Yep.
A common complaint about inspection of an FE college is that the inspectors can only perhaps go to one department rather than every department, or only go to one site rather than more sites. Whereas obviously if you turn up to a school with 50 pupils, then you're going to see everything, absolutely everything. But you're not going to be able to do that with the same current system of inspection of an FE college. That is on the table as a concern. Do you think it is a justifiable concern, and do you think that it just might be okay?
This is where I think you need different levels of sophistication in your approach to inspecting big institutions. And inspection is a kind of audit. Big institutions, the audit of big institutions typically involves looking at the internal processes of control and quality assurance to make sure that the senior management in large and diverse institutions themselves have a really good understanding on what's going on and where, so that your effort can be directed in the places where it's most needed, or whether the greatest reasons to have concerns about those internal judgments, with some sort of independent selection and testing to make sure that you're putting an appropriate level of reliance. So inspecting big institutions is clearly a much more complex job. So you can have, I think it's perfectly possible to have the same sort of fundamental principles of what you want inspection to deliver, but for the methodology by which you achieve that to be rather different in the different cases.
Thank you. Catherine, you're going to probe early years.
What do you think are the key issues